Hello, welcome back to this final part of the Substance series. Today I'm going to show you guys how to make a good render from what we've finished in the end, and how to add some additional detail with some bakes that we had in Substance Painter. So last time we set up the materials with this this control here for the color, for the hue saturation, the color of the jacket. So if I change the hue, I can change the jacket color. The saturation, all of these things that can help us, create like a customized color that we want to work with. We did the same for roughness. We added a color ramp so that we can affect the roughness channels. What I want to do is, if I go back into Substance Painter and I look under material option here, if I go down to the mesh maps, some of these we want to take with us into Blender to add just a little bit more detail. So those we want is the curvature, which is this map here. It has some shadows around these kind of wrinkles that we can add more shadow into the texture in Blender, and we want to take the ambient occlusion, which is here and has shadows baked into the texture as well. So again, we can take this into Blender. The way we do this is to go to File, Export Textures, choose our export folder, and then under Output Template, go to drop this down and choose Mesh Maps. And you can then choose how big you want the resolution. The texture set size is what you're working with in Painter. I do these at 2 or 4K depending on your system. And then when you've exported them, you will have this. So these are all the mesh maps that we baked inside Painter. They're now available for us to use in other programs if we want. And like I said, the ones we want are these ambient occlusion ones here, and we want these curvature ones here. I'm going to close Painter now, but that is how we export the baked textures. And I'll show you now how we can bring these into Blender and add additional detail to the jacket. So I'm going to select the 3D model that I want to work on, and I'm going to make sure that in the material view I have the jacket selected. My screen is split, so on the left side I've got a 3D viewport here. This is my screen split. And then here I'm in shader editor. So if you click this drop down menu, we can go into 3D view, which is here, or we can go into shader editor, which is here, which is what I want to look at mostly right now. So to start with, I am going to need a little bit more space to work with in this this node setup we've got here. So I'm going to highlight these 3 nodes on the side, the BSDF, the displacement, and the output, and I'm just going to drag them over a little. And now we can start to add in some mix nodes in between this to add in these texture maps. So first of all, we need to add the textures into the workspace. So I'm going to take this base color node in the top, press Shift and D on the keyboard, and I will get a duplicate of this node. I can just drop it on top of the other one, and I can click this white folder here, and I can now search for the maps that I want. So for me, those maps were in this mesh map export folder that I had, and it's ambient occlusion 1001 that I want to choose. So we look at it like this. This is ambient occlusion 1. If I click open image, we will now have the ambient occlusion in this node right here. You want to take the vector, this kind of purple input, you want to take this vector and connect it to this little knot of vectors, like of connectors here, like these are all connected to this vector point here, so that everything is using the same mapping and the same texture coordinates. Okay, so first things first, add the ambient occlusion like we just did, and then connect the vector. And then we want to add our first mix. So I'll press Shift and A and search for a mix RGB. Drop the mix RGB kind of here, and then take your ambient occlusion texture and drag the color into color 1. And then if we want to look at what this is doing, if I press Control Shift and I left click the output of this color node here, we can see what is actually happening inside this mix. So we'll zoom in on the mix a little. So now we have a color in the bottom and we have an input in the top. So the input is our ambient occlusion map, and this is the color that we're blending it with. So if I change this color to like red, for example, we're now blending the shadows over the red. not necessarily because we need to change this mix option. If I take this all the way to the left, we have just the ambient occlusion. So this is just the ambient occlusion texture. You see there's these kind of grey shadows in all the folds and stuff. This is just ambient occlusion. If I go all the way the other way, I have just this red factor, this red input that we've created, so I can change this to any color. That's fine. So if I go to 0.5, it will go to like half of one and half of the other, but this isn't how we want to blend these colors together. We want to do this with multiply. So if I drop the mix option down and I select multiply, we will now kind of layer these two things together. So now I have full blue input and I have also a full ambient occlusion shadow on top of this. If I unplug this, we'll have full blue, but all that shadow information is gone. And if I bring this back in again, those shadows are now visible. So we've kind of created a way to add a shadow, but you see this controller isn't affecting the shadow, it's affecting the base color. So it's turning the blue on and off rather than the shadow on and off. And the way we fix that is to switch the order of these inputs. So if I take this color, this ambient occlusion input here, and I put this into color 2 instead of color 1, and in color 1 I now add, say, this blue color again, the control now is controlling the shadow. It's not controlling the blue. The blue is constant and the shadow is what's being pushed in and out of this this texture that we're building. So what that means is that we can add in a little bit of shadows in a way that can add an extra layer of detail, and we have this controller to work with now. So instead of using blue, we want to work with this color creation that we've produced here. So if I take this color output from the hue saturation factor, from this hue saturation node here, and I drop this into color 1, we will now have the base color of this guy. So if I change this to 0.5, we have this brown color. And then if I push this up and down, we now have a controller for shadows. So that's one controller we built with those texture maps, those texture bakes that we've done in Substance. So I'll push this to about 0.9, I guess. And then we want to add in the curvature map as well. And we do that in the same way. So we'll do it with a multiply, and we'll do it by adding another image node here. So for now, I'll save this. I'll Control S to save. And then select the top one again, Shift and D to duplicate, drag this on top, take the vector and attach the vector into this vector here, so everything is connected with the vector. Everything connects back to here, okay? Then select this white folder icon, and instead of selecting ambient occlusion, select the first curvature map and just select the first one and press open image. And now we're going to add in another blend to blend this into this one that we created here. So what we're looking at now is only an output of this base color. So to have this be our node, be in our node structure, we need to take this output here and put this into base color here. So now we have the ambient occlusion and the base color going into hue saturation and into a mix that will then produce the base color. And if I then press Control Shift and left click the principal BSDF, we're now looking at the texture, full texture output. Before we were just looking at this, which was just the base color output. But if I take this shader and I plug it into surface, we're now looking at this as a material. So again, if I use this shader, this shadow controller that we've got here, I can push up and down this this shadow. So that's how we add the first blend, and then we will work now on the second blend. So we've selected the curvature map here. I'm going to choose the multiply and press Shift and D and duplicate this multiply node one more time. And then we're going to do the same thing. So the curve map will go into color 2. So I'll connect the curve map from the top to the color 2. And then the output of this shadow control, I'm going to put to the color 1. And then the output of this mix here, I'm going to put into base color in the shader. So now everything pipes into this last mix RGB here, which will now become our final color that we're producing for the base color. So again, to view this output of just this node and not the whole structure, not the whole kind of principled node, I press Control and Shift on the keyboard and left click this node, and it will give us a view immediately of what is happening with this curve right here. So if I push this all the way to the left, there's no curve being applied at all, and I push this all the way to the right, we have a full curve being applied. But we need another control between this and this, and I'll explain why. So if I do Control, Shift and left click on this top node here, we see this is the curve map, and it's very grey, it's quite flat. We want to push these values in a way that they are there's more contrast, that we have some whiter areas and some darker areas, again to add more shadows into these kind of folds and wrinkles. This is something we've done in Painter, but we also want to build a control into Blender so that it's easier to control these things without having to go into Substance Painter. So I want to view this, the output of this node here. So I'm going to press Control, Shift and left click again on the principled BSDF, and now we're looking at the whole material. If I press Shift and A, I'm going to search for a ramp, and I'm going to add this color ramp between the curvature map and the mix node right here. So we should go from the curvature map into the color ramp, and then the color ramp goes into the mix, and then the mix goes into the base color of the shader. Okay, so if I press Control Shift and I left click the output of the color ramp, I can now see what this color ramp is going to do to our curvature map. So if I push this white slider down, I get a white value, it becomes more intense, and if I push this black slider down, the black value becomes more intense. So I can create a kind of a deeper shadow than what we had before. So these two sliders are going to help us create some more of those impressions. And then I'm going to want to look at how this is affecting the shader as a whole. So if I press again Control Shift and left click the BSDF shader, I'll now see this the effect of this curvature map on the material. So I'm going to zoom in on this mix here, and if I push this up and down, you can see the effect that this is having on our leather. It becomes a bit darker all the way up, and it becomes lighter all the way down. So again, look at how you can work with these values in the curvature map to add bits of shadow or an additional bit of detail. You can use these blend factors to control those details. So now your material will look like this for the jacket. I've only applied these two blend options to the jacket because I don't need that additional detail in the pants. I just want it for this type of old leather material. So I'm going to press Control and S to save this again. And now we've got two mix nodes set to multiply, and they are blending into our base color, the curvature map and the ambient occlusion map. So again, if I press Control Shift and left click just this last blend, we see the base color that we've created now, and if I move this slider up and down, you see how this is creating deeper shadows in some of those folds and lighter edges. So this is one control we've created, and then this here is another control. So if I turn these completely off, this is our base color now, and if I turn a bit of the shadows up and a bit of the curvature up, we've started to add in more levels of detail into this base color. So again, to view this whole material, I'm going to do Control Shift and left click the principal BSDF shader, and I would say this material is now set up and we're ready to produce some nice renders. So I'm going to press Control and S again, and then we're going to go into the 3D view and start to change the lights and change the way that we've set this scene up. Okay. Before we go into 3D view, I'm going to go, I'll click Object here. I'll change from Object to World. So in the top part of the screen, now we're in the shader editor for objects, so the object being the garments, and we want to edit the shaders for the world. So if I go into World shader, I might have to zoom out a bit to find our world output. But basically this is setting the background color of the world here. So this color here, if I change this, click here and I change this to white, we should be able to view the change to this. We need to be in rendered view to do this. So to go to rendered view, just click this in the viewport shading options here, choose the last circle, and it will put us in render mode. It might need a second to load. But now we can change the color of this background. So I've changed this to white, and it gives us a world that looks white. If I change this to red, the world will look red. But this is very much a color that is affecting our scene. So if I push the intensity up, the whole thing will start to reflect quite red. What we want to do here is add a world texture, like a HDRI image texture. To do that, I'm just going to click this background node and press Ctrl and T. And with Node Wrangler set up, like as we did in the previous videos, you'll get this coordinate mapping and environment texture nodes open up. This will happen when you press Ctrl T and click on this guy. Press open here, and I'm going to navigate to my HDRI folder, and I'm going to use this abandoned one. I got all these from Polyhaven, so find some online that you want to work with. But this has given us now basically a world light. So our world isn't just being lit by the lights in the scene, it's being lit by this image. So if on the right side of the screen I have two lights, light 1 and light 2, if I turn this eye, I click the eye, it'll turn them off. And I'll see just now exactly what this image texture is doing. So if I want to rotate this world, I can do that with the Z rotation axis here. So if I change this number, the world will spin, and I can set it in a nice position to get some shadows, maybe about here. I can then also use additional lights to light this however else I might want to do that. So we're going to use a combination of world lights and of HDRI lights in this to get a nice natural light effect. I'm going to go back quickly into the shaded mode, so just into the shaded mode like this to start to add some planes and to start to add some cameras. So I'm going to go out of shaded view here. I'll click out of the shader editor here, so I'll click this menu to drop down from this circle here. I'll click 3D viewport, and now we're viewing the 3D space. Okay, so very quickly, Shift and A on the keyboard, go to mesh, and then choose plane. Press S on the keyboard to scale this, and then drag your mouse up and down and you will be able to scale this. Scale it to quite a big size, I guess about here, and then just click and it will apply the scaling. If you press R, you can rotate this any way you want, but and then press escape, you can escape. So R to start to rotate, escape to drop it back to the original position, but if you press R, Z, and then 90 or 180, you can start to rotate this on a certain axis. So if I do R, X, 90, just pressing Ctrl Z to go back. So R, X, and then 90. I'll have this at a perfect 90-degree angle now. I can then press R and Z to rotate this kind of at an angle. Use the gizmo here to look at this from like the top down view. So if I click just Z, I can look at this from the top or the bottom. And then if I press R as well, I can now rotate this, the angle of this plane. And I want this to be at kind of like a 45-degree angle about here. And then I'm just going to press G to grab this and then move it away from my garments. So what I'm going to do is basically have my garments in the middle, and then I've got this plane in the side. I'm making a corner to like cast some light into, so I'm going to take this one and press Shift and D to duplicate it. If I press Escape on the keyboard, it will drop it in its original position, and then if I press R and Z, I can rotate this again on the Z axis. If I press the Z in the gizmo, I can now drag this by pressing G in the world space and just kind of creating a little corner point behind my model. So you see now in the 3D view here, my garment is in the corner of like a studio lighting kind of thing. So that was just adding simply two planes. So if I go into render view now, we'll see these two white planes in the background. So this is giving us the start of like a studio environment to work with. And then if we go back into the shader editor, I can again like rotate this light to cast in front and make some shadows, or I can spin this around wherever I want. Maybe it's nice to have a bit of a natural light coming through like this. But very quickly now we can set this up to look exactly as we wish. So with these planes selected, I'm going to I'll click the plane on the right side of the screen, and I'm going to click in the material option, click add new. And now we're going to work with the wall material basically. And it's going to be a very simple material to set up. So I'll double click this and I'll rename it wall. You know what it is. And then I'm going to drop down from world shader view, shader editor into object and go back to object. And this is the setup for the wall material that we're making. So if I turn the base color down to like a black color, not complete black, but very dark gray will do for what we want here. The roughness I could put down a little bit so it's a little bit reflective. And then I think for now that's all we really need to think about. So for this second plane, to add the same material, if I choose plane 001, which is the duplicate, I drop this menu down here in material, this little circle option here, and this will show me all the materials that are in this environment. So now I'll choose wall here, and they will both have the same texture applied to them. And now we want to add in some artificial lights just to light this a bit more, give it a bit more focus on how this is lit. So I'm going to save this here, press Ctrl and S to save, and then go back to 3D view. So I click this this drop down menu here, and then click 3D viewport, and I'm back into the 3D mode. I already have two lights in the scene that I've turned the visibility off, and I'll turn those back on now so I can see how they're affecting the scene. And they're very bright, and they're very much washing out everything. So I can fix that with this first light here. So this is a point light. And if you want to add a light, press Shift and A, go down to lights, and then choose point, and you will add a point light. It'll go by default right in the origin point of the scene, and then if you press G, you can move this light around. It'll attach to your mouse. Or you can press X to delete it. I'm going to work with this one here. I'm going to position it kind of away, press G to grab it, move it around. I'm going to move this kind of away from the garments, and I'm going to increase the radius a little bit, but I'm going to really drop down the power. So to edit the light, choose the light in the right side, click the light bulb that's green on the right side of the screen, and then the power we can set to about 150 or something, maybe 250. And then this light here, I've got another one kind of in the background. I'm going to reduce the radius of this to make it quite small. And I'm going to press G to grab it and position it right behind my garments, okay? Right now, it's very much above the garment, so if I look at this in 3D space, it's above. If I press G and then Z, I can move this down the Z-axis to put it exactly behind my my garments, okay? Again, I might move this back a bit, so if I press G and then Y, I can push this just on the Y-axis a little bit away from the garments. And again, I might reduce the radius slightly to about 0.15. And now we have kind of a rim light behind the garment, lighting it from behind. I might move it up a little bit actually, G, Z to move up. And we see now a light from behind and a light in the front. So this is kind of a 2-point lighting setup to just add in a bit of shadows and some contrast around the garment. So experiment with how you position these, and what I'm going to do now is turn this material in the background to a different material that's a lot less reflective. So if I go back into, if I choose the menu up here on the right side, I go back into shader editor, and then I choose my wall material. I'm going to push the roughness all the way up. I'm going to push the metallic all the way up. And I'm going to change the base color and make it even darker to get quite a dark environment here. I'm going to jump into the world view, and I'm going to rotate this light the other way. maybe about here. Let's see how that looks. So we want to light this from above, so I'm going to spin this light around so that the sun is kind of pushing the other direction. So if I go about here, kind of spin it all the way around. I'm going to add a light above this, and I'm going to move one of the lights that are in the scene as well. So if I go back into 3D viewport, I drop this menu down back to 3D viewport. This guy, I can kind of move around here, bring it a bit closer and a bit more to the side. So we're lighting up this side of the garment with this light here. And I'm going to press Shift and A. I'm going to go to light, and I'm going to click area. And that will add an area light directly underneath my garment. If I look at this from front view, so if I click in the gizmo, if I click on this Y here, I'll look at this straight on from the front. With this light, area light selected, press G and Z and start to lift it up. And we'll now have quite a nice light from above. We don't want this to be too strong, and we can make the size of this a little bigger by using the size option here on the light property editor here. And now we have this kind of nice light coming down from above. We have a light casting across the side here, and then we have this rim light behind that's actually quite bright. So I'm going to select this rim light behind. It's a point light, but it's set to a very high value, so I'll put this at about 500. 500, not 50. And that seems a little softer, this lighting here. The one thing I just want to do as well is move these walls a bit further away from the clothing. So I'll click and then click one wall to select it, shift click the other one to select both, press G on the keyboard and then press Y to move on the Y axis, and then just move this back and forward on the Y axis. And we don't want to go too far. G, Y, but just a little bit. Okay. So now we've kind of created this dark studio lighting setup that, if we look quite close, is giving us some nice details around this jacket. Okay. The last thing we want to do now is add in a camera. So I'm going to press Shift and A and then go to camera. And then I'm going to press Shift and A and go to empty and choose sphere, because I want to have a focal point to work with. So with the sphere, the empty sphere selected, press S and reduce the size of this down to about, like, I don't know, like a football size. Press G and Z to move this up on the Z axis. And what we're going to do is, if I zoom in and I just grab this and move it around, this little dot in the middle is going to become our focal point. So if I want to really focus on this part of the jacket, I will place this empty as the focal point for, like, right here is where the camera is going to focus in on, and wherever I move this to is going to be that focal point. So G to grab and move this, S to scale this up and down. It needs to be quite small, to be honest, but it's this point in the center that's going to be our new focal point. Okay, so I'm setting the focal point on the front of this jacket, and then I'm going to choose this camera, and with this camera selected, like, if I square this up in a nice angle right here, and I think, okay, this angle in the viewport is what I want. If I press Control, Alt, and then 0 on my number pad, it will make my camera take that position. So it actually did it with my other camera, because I already had one in the screen which was set to my active camera. So if I just delete this camera and I select this one as my active camera right now, so when you've got a camera in the scene, there's a camera icon next to it in green, and it will have a grey box around it so you know it's active. So again, on this side of the screen, this is kind of the camera angle I want. So I'll press Control Alt 0, and if you see now, my camera's moved into that position. A couple of things to check really quick. If I go to the right side, if I click this that looks like the back of a camera in white, first option, this is my noise samples for my render, so I can leave this for now. We'll change this when we do start to produce a render. The one thing I want to check is the one that looks like a printer, the output properties. I'm going to set this to 1024 by 1024 to have like a square format, and then I'm going to modify my camera angle to get a nice look here. So if I go to the left side of the screen where my camera is and I press N on the keyboard, this menu will shoot out. Click on view and then click camera to view. That's what it says here. And what that means now, if I move around these view with using the viewport like gizmo, my camera's going to stay in position and I'm just moving where the camera is. So if you see on this side of the screen, the camera is actually moving around based on how I move these angles here, okay? If I turn off camera to view, it's just going to make the frame of my camera move in and out of the screen with zoom, and if I change the angle, I'm going to go out of camera view. So to get back into camera view, click this picture of a camera here, and then you'll snap back into camera view, and then to close this menu down, press N to turn it on and off. I'm going to leave camera to view selected, and I'm going to press N to get rid of this because I feel like this is a nice size camera for me to work with, okay? So I can change this angle a bit. The last thing we're going to do is add the depth of field into this so that this focal point is going to some use. So on the right side of the screen, select camera, go down to the right hand side, select the grid camera, turn on the depth of field checkbox, and everything's going to go blurry. And then to fix the blur, under focus object, choose empty. Now this empty is our focal point. So if I grab this empty and press G and move it, I move it away from the garment, the focus is off the garment. If I move it towards the garment, it's on the garment. So this is exactly how we're going to control this focus. We can add into this focus by changing the f-stop. So 2 is quite low, there's going to be a lot of blur. And if I put this to 6, it's higher, there's going to be less blur. So I'll leave this at about 4.2 right now. And if I then were to zoom in with my camera, you would see we have a really nice focal area here right around where we've added this empty. But then as as we move away from the camera, the garment starts to go into blur, which is how a camera works, and that's an effect that we want to have in the scene so that the camera feels more natural and authentic. I'm just going to set up a nice shot to render here. I think this will do for now. The lighting feels okay. We've set a focal point. I'm going to save this before I start the render and just turn it into shaded view on the top left side here. And then to output a render, just press F12 on the keyboard, and the render will run. This is coming out as 1K render because we set the image size to 1K, so this is how big our render is coming out now. And this is rendering quite quick. It took about 14 seconds to render this 1K image. A quick note, I'm going to close this, a quick note on how to improve this. Click the back of the camera, go to the right side. Under render, we're doing 4096 samples, which is a lot. I'm going to turn this to 2048, so half. I'm going to turn off denoising, because that can take away some of the detail sometimes if we don't set it up properly. So for now, I'm just going to turn it off. And under noise threshold, I'm going to turn this to 0.025 to just increase that number. The viewport is set to 0.1 and the render is set to 0.01 by default. So you understand that the bigger this number becomes, this noise threshold, the noisier the image is, but the quicker it will render. So that will speed up the render, and so will the sample time. To increase the size, we go to the printer, what looks like a printer, which is our output properties. And under this percentage here, if I change this to 200, it will now render 200% the size of this. So it'll be set to 2040, so 2K render. If I set it again, you know, if I continue to add into this percentage, we'll create a bigger and bigger image. But for me now, a 2K render is quite fine. So if I press F12 on the keyboard again, now we're rendering a bigger image. This is 2K. And it will render less samples, and it should be okay. So I think this is now rendering 2K. You see the sample count going up quite quick here. The 2K render took 14 seconds by us changing those settings as well, and now we have our render. So I think that kind of completes this course. Experiment with camera angles, experiment with lights, experiment with different ways to build an environment, experiment with how you can, you know, use these different controllers that I mentioned inside Blender. But yeah, I think that sums everything up. You guys should now be able to take something out of Clo, create a nice texture set inside Subtance Painter, bring all of that into Blender, and now be able to produce a really nice final render inside Blender. So I'm going to go image, save as, save this image to a folder, and now I can go back, change some of my camera angles around. Maybe from this side we do a render now, press F12, and boom, we're rendering. So I hope this has been useful for you guys. I hope you'll be able to create some nice renders out of this in the end. I'm interested to see what you guys have been working on. So yeah, look out for the next one.